3 years ago my father hissed, "You're dead to us," as they stripped me of my name, my wealth, even my face. Today, under the neon glow of Tokyo's rain-soaked streets, I stepped into my own funeral. The coffin empty, miss me? I whispered, peeling off my mask. The screams began. "You're dead to us," Nicholas Carson hissed, his wedding ring still wet with my blood as he towered over me. The words hung in the air like poison, transforming 25 years of family into ash. Just yesterday I had been Sophia Carson, beloved daughter and heiress to an empire. Now I was nobody. 3 hours earlier the dinner table had gleamed under chandelier light, crystal glasses capturing prisms that danced across hand-painted china. Nicholas adjusted his Hermes tie with manicured fingers, clearing his throat with the practiced authority that had silenced boardrooms for decades. The sound resonated through our cavernous dining room, immediately halting the soft clink of silverware. I knew that sound. It preceded every life-altering announcement he'd ever made. "The Anderson merger depends on this, Sophia." His voice carried the smooth confidence of a man unaccustomed to being refused. "Richard's son is a fine match, Ivy League educated and primed to take over his father's portion of the business. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank each of you for being part of this incredible journey. If you're finding yourself drawn to stories of identity, resilience, and the courage it takes to reclaim your truth against all odds, consider subscribing. It's completely free and helps us share more stories of people rising from their own ashes. Now let's dive into a tale where being declared dead was just the beginning. My fingers trembled against the Egyptian cotton tablecloth, a microscopic rebellion my body initiated before my mind could catch up. I looked from my stepfather to my stepmother Olivia, who sat perfectly poised in her Chanel dress, eyes fixated on her barely touched salmon as if it contained secret messages. The pearls around her neck caught the light as she swallowed uncomfortably. 3 years of dating Eric in secret had culminated in this moment. Clandestine coffee dates in obscure cafes, stolen weekends when I was supposedly at leadership retreats, photos hidden in an encrypted folder labeled market research. My stomach churned as I formed the words that would detonate the perfect life Nicholas had engineered. "I'm already in love with someone else." Nicholas's fork clattered against fine china, the sound like a gunshot in our dining room. 25 years of being the perfect daughter, the straight A student, the impeccable debutante, the corporate heiress in training, evaporated in an instant as his face contorted with rage. I'd seen that expression directed at underperforming executives, never at me. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked 7 excruciating seconds of silence. "Who?" Olivia whispered, finally meeting my gaze, her perfectly manicured hand reaching for her wine glass. A tiny tremor betrayed her composure as Cabernet sloshed dangerously close to the rim. "His name is Eric. He's a photographer I met at the Thompson Foundation Gala last year." The words tumbled out faster now, as if speed could somehow soften the impact. "He's talented and kind and a nobody with a camera?" Nicholas interrupted, his voice dropping to that dangerous register he reserved for corporate takeovers. He dabbed his mouth with his napkin, the gesture deliberately slow. "You'd throw away your future for that?" The familiar knot formed in my chest, the one that had appeared whenever I'd considered disappointing him. Since childhood I'd been desperate for approval from the man who'd raised me since I was 4. Every achievement, from Princeton graduation to my MBA, had been pursued with Nicholas's approving nod as the ultimate prize. But something in me snapped. Perhaps it was Eric's words from the night before. "You're more than just the Carson name, Sophia." "He sees me," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "not some corporate pawn to be married off for a business advantage." The slap came without warning, his palm connecting with my cheek with such force that my head jerked sideways. The cold press of his wedding ring cut into my skin, and I tasted copper as my inner cheeks split against my teeth. 25 years of calculated affection, and I'd never seen the violence that lurked beneath his polished veneer. "Nicholas!" Olivia gasped, half rising from her chair. He ignored her, straightening his cuffs as if he'd merely signed a contract rather than struck his daughter. "You have until tomorrow to come to your senses," he hissed, rising from his chair with dreadful composure. "Either you call this photographer and end it, or you're no longer welcome in this house." The door to his study slammed, leaving Olivia and me in brittle silence. She wouldn't meet my eyes as she rose, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her dress. He doesn't mean it, I whispered, touching my throbbing cheek. He can't. Her laugh was hollow as she collected her wine glass. Oh, Sophia. You've never understood him at all. That night, I paced my bedroom, a pristine showcase of wealth with its hand-painted wallpaper and antique four-poster bed. The space suddenly felt foreign, like a museum exhibit of someone else's life. I pulled a Rimowa suitcase from my closet, the one I'd used for Aspen ski weekends and Mediterranean summers, and began filling it with essentials. Tears streamed down my face as I touched the framed photos on my dresser. Nicholas teaching me to ride at our Hamptons estate. Olivia adjusting my graduation cap. The three of us on our yacht in St. Tropez, all perfect white teeth and designer sunglasses. A flawless family narrative, curated for Christmas cards and society pages. At 3 a.m. I found myself in the East Wing Gallery, staring at generations of Carson portraits. Distinguished men in bespoke suits and women with heirloom jewels, none bearing my chestnut hair or wide-set eyes. How had I never noticed before? My fingers traced the frame of Nicholas's imposing portrait, searching his painted features for any resemblance to mine and finding none. Dawn broke with cruel clarity. I showered, applied concealer to my bruised cheek, and dressed in a Burberry suit I'd worn to my first board meeting. Armor for what was to come. When the house stirred with morning routines, I walked steadily to Nicholas's home office and knocked. "Enter," he called, voice crisp as if yesterday's violence had never occurred. I stood before his mahogany desk, shoulders back despite my trembling knees. The morning light cast his silver hair in an almost angelic glow, a cruel contrast to the coldness in his eyes. "I won't marry someone I don't love just so you can secure a business deal." Each word felt like a small victory, a declaration of independence. Nicholas set down his fountain pen with deliberate slowness. "Then you'll leave with nothing. The trust fund, the car, your credit cards, all contingent on being a Carson." His tone was matter-of-fact, as if discussing whether rather than dismantling my existence. The ground seemed to shift beneath my Louboutins. "You'd disown your own daughter over this?" The silence that followed was broken by Olivia's voice from the doorway. "You were never really his daughter anyway, Sophia." She entered like a ghost, still in her silk robe, eyes red-rimmed from either tears or wine. It's time she knew, Nicholas. The truth spilled out in ugly fragments as Olivia described how they'd adopted me after my biological parents, friends of theirs, died in an accident. James and Elizabeth Reed, she called them. Names that should have been familiar but instead felt like fiction. "We took you in as a favor," she said, her voice hollow. "Gave you our name and everything money could buy." Nicholas nodded grimly. "And this is how you repay our generosity. By refusing the one thing we've ever asked of you." My world imploded as 25 years of identity crumbled. The room tilted as realization washed over me. The different coloring, the absence of childhood photos before age 4, the whispers at family reunions that suddenly stopped when I approached. "Why didn't you ever tell me I was adopted?" I whispered. Nicholas's response was biting. "Would it have made a difference? You still owe us everything you are." "I owe you gratitude, not servitude," I managed, though my voice cracked. "I'm not a possession to be traded for corporate advantage." His eyes narrowed. Clearly we failed to instill proper values. The Sophia Carson we raised would understand her responsibilities to this family. Perhaps I'm more Reed than Carson after all. When I turned to leave, his final words cut deeper than the now dried blood on my cheek. "Walk out that door and you're dead to us. The Sophia Carson we raised would never be this selfish." I didn't look back. Security guards appeared as if summoned by telepathy, flanking me as I returned to my room for my suitcase. Their presence transformed the home I'd grown up in into hostile territory, my childhood bedroom into a space I was no longer welcome to occupy. "I need more time," I protested as they ushered me toward the front entrance. "There are things, mementos, photos." "Mr. Carson's instructions were clear, miss," the older guard said, his expression professionally blank despite having known me since childhood. They escorted me past the gallery with its judging ancestors, through the soaring foyer with its marble fountain, and down the limestone steps that had witnessed countless society events. The gates that had enclosed my childhood swung open, then closed behind me with electronic finality. I stood on the sidewalk, designer suitcase at my feet, struck by the absurdity of the moment. Joggers passed, casting curious glances at the woman in business attire stranded outside one of Boston's most prestigious addresses. One of the guards, Marco, who taught me to drive when I was 16, approached hesitantly, extending an envelope. "Mrs. Carson wanted you to have this." His eyes held an apology he couldn't vocalize. Inside was a single black and white photo of a young couple holding an infant, my real parents, and enough cash for a week in a cheap motel. No note, no explanation. Just strangers' faces and temporary financial mercy. The last thing I saw before turning away was Eric's Audi pulling into the driveway, his artistic profile visible through the windshield. The car I'd helped him choose when his first gallery show had sold out. Hours later, as I sat on the edge of a creaking bed in a motel that advertised hourly rates, his tearful phone call confirmed what I'd suspected. Nicholas had offered him money to disappear, and unlike me, Eric had taken the deal. "It's not what you think," he sobbed. "The gallery, my career, he would have destroyed everything." "How much?" I asked, voice empty. How much was I worth? The silence told me enough. Alone and suddenly nameless, I walked toward downtown Boston, the weight of rejection crushing my chest with each step. 25 years of identity stripped away in a single day, leaving behind only the raw, uncertain truth. I had never been who I thought I was. The neon sign of the Bluebird Motel flickered erratically, casting sickly pulses of light across the stained carpet. The wallpaper peeled at the corners in defeated curls, a fitting backdrop to my unraveling life. I lay motionless on the sagging mattress, watching water stains on the ceiling morph into accusatory faces. Day blended into night and back again, time losing meaning as I replayed Nicholas's final words on endless loop. "You're dead to us." 7 days of mindless grief had depleted Olivia's emergency cash. The motel manager had knocked twice already, his thin politeness wearing as thin as my prospects. I tried my credit cards at an ATM. All declined with the same cold electronic finality. My phone buzzed with automatic overdraft notices from accounts I'd been locked out of. 25 years of financial security vanished like morning fog. I caught my reflection in the bathroom's cracked mirror. Hollow eyes, unwashed hair, the fading bruise on my cheek now yellowed around the edges. The woman staring back was a stranger whose life had imploded without warning. Not Sophia Carson, Boston socialite and corporate heiress. Just a nameless refugee with dwindling options. Panic clawed at my throat as I scrolled through my contacts, eliminated name after name. Society friends who owed their loyalty to Nicholas. Business associates who would never cross him. Former classmates too distant to trust with something so overwhelming. Only one name remained, Megan Rhodes. We'd been inseparable throughout childhood until Nicholas deemed her family insufficient connections, when we turned 16. I'd maintained our friendship in secret ever since, meeting for coffee when I could escape Nicholas's orbit. Would she even answer after months of sporadic contact? Her voice, when she picked up on the second ring, held no hesitation. "Sophia? Is everything okay? You never call this late." The simple kindness in her tone broke something inside me. Words tumbled out in disjointed fragments. Disowned, adopted, homeless. She cut through my rambling with the decisiveness I'd always admired. "My address is 842 Maple Avenue, apartment 3B. Come now. I'll have the couch ready." 2 hours later, I sat in her modest but warm living room, clutching a mug of tea with trembling hands as I recounted everything. Her expression shifted from shock to outrage as I described Nicholas's manipulation and violence. "Stay here until you figure things out," she insisted, showing me to her spare bedroom, a tiny space dominated by a futon and overflowing bookshelves. No one would think to look for the Carson heiress in my teacher's salary apartment. That night, curled beneath borrowed blankets that smelled of fabric softener rather than Egyptian cotton, I sobbed until my ribs ached. Not just for the material comforts lost, but for the shattered illusion of family I desperately believed in. Every childhood memory now required re-examination. Had any of Nicholas's rare displays of affection been genuine, or merely calculated investments in a future corporate asset? The photograph of my biological parents lay on the nightstand, their young faces looking back at me with unsettling familiarity. James and Elizabeth Reed, strangers who had given me life, whose features I now searched for in my own. Had they loved me? Did they have families still living who might claim me? Questions multiplied in the darkness, keeping sleep at bay until exhaustion finally pulled me under. I awoke to rain pattering against unfamiliar windows and the distant sounds of Megan preparing for work. A text notification illuminated my phone screen from an unknown number, the message making my blood run cold. "We need to talk. Meet me at Westlake Park at noon. Important information about your adoption." Oh. My thumb hovered over the delete button. Olivia had stood silent while Nicholas disowned me, had participated in the lie that formed the foundation of my existence. Yet she'd slipped me that photograph and cash, small mercies that suggested, what? Guilt? Regret? "You shouldn't go," Megan said from the doorway, reading my expression with the ease of old friendship. "It could be a trap. Or it could be answers," I countered, already knowing my decision. "About who I really am. Where I come from. At least let me drive you. I'll watch from a distance." I shook my head. "If Nicholas is having you watch too, that would just endanger you. I can't risk that." Despite my better judgment, desperation for answers pulled me toward the park like a magnet. I arrived early, positioning myself with clear sight lines to all entrances, a baseball cap pulled low over my face. The spring rain had driven away most visitors, leaving only a few determined joggers circling the path. At precisely noon, a black town car pulled up to the southern entrance. Olivia emerged wearing oversized sunglasses, a chic trench coat and evident anxiety. She scanned the park systematically, clutching her designer handbag like a shield. I approached from behind, startling her. "You wanted to talk?" She flinched, then gestured to a secluded bench beneath a dripping cherry tree. "Nicholas doesn't know I'm here," she whispered, glancing repeatedly over her shoulder. "There's something you should know about your parents." Up close, Olivia looked haggard beneath her perfect makeup, fine lines around her mouth deepened by whatever burden she carried. She slid a manila envelope across the wet bench between us. "I found these hidden in Nicholas's private safe, behind the Monet in his study." Inside were yellowed newspaper clippings about my biological parents' accident, police reports with troubling inconsistencies, and most damning, a handwritten letter from Elizabeth Reed to Nicholas dated 3 weeks before their deaths. "We cannot in good conscience remain silent about what we've discovered," my mother had written. Asterisk, "If the SEC investigation reveals your involvement, we'll have no choice but to testify." They were threatening to expose Nicholas's first investment scheme, Olivia explained, voice trembling. "The one that built his initial fortune. I always suspected he was involved somehow in their accident, but I never had proof until I found these." The world tilted sideways as implications crashed into me. Not just adopted but orphaned by the very man who'd raised me. The photograph of my parents took on horrific new dimensions. Had Nicholas kept it as some perverse trophy? "Why are you telling me this now?" I demanded, my voice razor sharp. "After 25 years of silence?" Olivia's perfectly manicured hands twisted in her lap. "Because I'm afraid, Sophia. Afraid of what he's capable of. When you left, something changed in him. He's been making calls, checking security footage. He's obsessed with retrieving something he thinks you might have taken." "I didn't take anything. But he thinks you did. Or might have seen something. Her eyes suddenly widened, focusing on something behind me. "He followed me," she gasped, then shoved me hard toward the fountain. "Run." I stumbled forward, clutching the envelope to my chest as I turned to see what had terrified her. The man approaching wasn't Nicholas, but someone equally familiar. Vincent Keller, Nicholas's problem solver. I'd seen him at corporate events, always hovering at the periphery, his bland features masking something cold and reptilian. His grip closed around my arm like a vice, fingers digging into flesh with practiced efficiency. "Miss Carson," he said, voice professionally neutral despite the violence of his grasp. "Your father is concerned about your mental state. Let me help you to the car." A black SUV idled at the curb, windows tinted against curious eyes. Panic surged through me as I realized the magnitude of the danger. This wasn't about family disappointment. It was about silencing a potential witness. Olivia screamed for help, the sound shrill and desperate enough to turn heads among the few park visitors. Vincent's partner emerged from the SUV, his hand reaching beneath his jacket and emerging with a pistol. 2 shots cracked the air, deliberately fired skyward but achieving their purpose. scattering bystanders in panicked confusion. In the chaos, I fought with unexpected ferocity, years of country club tennis and equestrian training translating into physical strength Vincent hadn't anticipated. My nails raked his cheek, drawing blood as I twisted violently against his grip. For one brief moment I broke free, stumbling backward toward the ornate fountain that centered the park. "You know too much now," he snarled, all pretense of professionalism abandoned as he lunged for me again. We struggled at the fountain's edge, my fingers desperately clutching the envelope of evidence while fighting to maintain balance on rain-slicked stone. His hands found my shoulders, shoving with calculated force. The world tilted, gravity claiming me as I fell backward. The last thing I remember was my head cracking against the stone edge, a single crystalline moment of blinding pain before the fountain's cold water rushed over my face, filling my nose and mouth as consciousness fled. Beeping machines pulled me back to a world of agony. My head throbbed with each heartbeat, my face a landscape of pain so intense it transcended specific location. Bandages obscured my vision, and when I tried to move my hands to explore the damage, I discovered they too were wrapped in gauze. "Don't touch," came a gentle female voice. A nurse's face swam into focus, her expression professional yet tinged with pity. "The doctor will be in shortly to explain everything." The everything was delivered in clinical terms that did nothing to soften the reality. "Severe facial trauma," the neurosurgeon explained, reviewing my chart. "The impact shattered your orbital bone and cheekbone. We've stabilized you, but you'll need extensive reconstructive surgery once the swelling subsides." A police officer appeared at my bedside later that day, notebook in hand and skepticism evident in his posture. He took my statement with professional detachment, his pen hesitating over certain details. "You understand," he said finally, "that Mr. Carson has already filed reports about his mentally unstable adopted daughter threatening the family after being cut off financially. Mrs. Carson stated you became agitated during your meeting and attempted to assault her before falling into the fountain." "That's a lie," I protested, wincing as the movement sent fresh pain through my shattered face. "The envelope, there was evidence." "No envelope was recovered at the scene," he said, closing his notebook with an air of finality. "Just you, unconscious in the fountain with witnesses who saw you acting erratically." 2 days later, Megan sneaked past hospital security, her face pale with shock at my appearance. "Oh God, Sophia," she whispered, hand covering her mouth. "What have they done to you?" "Made me unrecognizable apparently," I managed through swollen lips. She perched on the edge of the hospital bed, eyes darting nervously to the door. "Everyone's talking about it. It's all over the news but twisted. Nicholas is telling people you attacked Olivia in the park after she rejected your attempt at reconciliation. They're saying you had some kind of breakdown after learning about your adoption." "And Olivia? Is she backing this story?" Megan's silence was answer enough. That evening I managed to turn on the television in my hospital room, my bandaged fingers fumbling with the remote. The familiar logo of the local news appeared, followed by a somber anchor. "Sophia Carson, recently disowned by prominent businessman Nicholas Carson, remains in critical condition after an apparent suicide attempt. Sources close to the family say Carson had been displaying erratic behavior following revelations about her adoption." The screen showed an old photograph of me at a charity gala, smiling beside Nicholas and Olivia, the perfect family now fractured by alleged mental instability. The carefully constructed narrative left no room for alternative explanations. No murderous intentions, no corporate cover-ups, just a troubled young woman unable to handle rejection. My medical bills were mysteriously paid by an anonymous donor. When I was finally discharged a week later, my face still heavily bandaged and barely functional, a woman I'd never seen before waited in the lobby. Tall and elegant in a charcoal pantsuit, she approached with purposeful steps. "My name is Yumiko Tanaka," she said, her American accent contrasting with her Japanese name. "I represent someone who believes you need to disappear before Nicholas silences you permanently." She guided me to a sleek black sedan with diplomatic plates, revealing no emotion as I eased my broken body into the leather seat. Once we were moving through rain-slicked streets, she handed me a slim portfolio. Inside lay a plane ticket to Tokyo, a new passport under the name Claire Bennett, and a data drive. My hands trembled as I examined the unfamiliar name beneath a photograph taken since my injuries, face still swollen but recognizably altered. The reconstructive surgery you need? My employer will cover it in exchange for information about Carson Industries' operations in Asia. Yumiko continued, her voice matter-of-fact. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement. You get a new face, a new identity, and protection from Nicholas. My employer gets insider knowledge about his biggest competitor. With nowhere else to turn and a face too damaged to recognize, I made my decision in the time it took for one labored breath. 12 hours later, I boarded a plane to a country I'd never visited, my old life burning to ashes behind me as the aircraft lifted through cloud-heavy skies. Rain streaked down the windows of Dr. Hiroshi Matsuda's office, transforming Tokyo's neon landscape into a watercolor of bleeding lights. His skilled fingers moved with practiced precision as he unwrapped the final layer of bandages from my face, his expression revealing nothing. "Please remain still," he murmured, his accented English formal but kind. 3 surgeries over 6 months had reconstructed what Vincent's attack had destroyed. The first had been emergency repair, performed while I was still heavily sedated from the international flight. The second and third were more deliberate, artistic even, using the faded photograph of my mother as reference. The last bandage fell away and Dr. Matsuda stepped back, studying his work with the critical eye of a sculptor. "The resemblance to your birth mother is remarkable," he finally observed, retrieving a hand mirror from his desk drawer. "Perhaps this was meant to be." My fingers trembled as I accepted the mirror, hesitating before lifting it to eye level. A stranger looked back at me, higher cheekbones, a slightly narrower nose, fuller lips. The changes were subtle individually but transformative in their totality. My eyes alone remained unchanged, the one feature I'd apparently inherited from my father. Words failed me as I traced the unfamiliar contours with my fingertips. "Your facial bone structure required significant reconstruction," Dr. Matsuda explained. "I took the liberty of using your mother's features as a template. More natural than arbitrary choices. I was no longer Sophia Carson but Claire Bennett, a ghost with my mother's face. The American socialite had died in a hospital bed while I emerged in her place, remade and renamed. My mysterious benefactor, who I now knew was Akira Nakamura, a businessman Nicholas had double-crossed during Carson Industries' first expansion into Asian markets, appeared at my final post-operative appointment. Tall and immaculately dressed in a charcoal suit, his silver-streaked hair the only concession to his 60 years, Akira bowed slightly before taking the seat beside me. "You heal well," he observed, his English precise and unaccented. "Dr. Matsuda has exceeded expectations." "Why help me?" I asked directly, still unaccustomed to Japanese conversational indirectness. "What do you really want?" Akira's smile never reached his eyes. "Nicholas Carson destroyed my family's pharmaceutical company through industrial espionage and manufactured scandals. My father died believing himself a failure." He straightened his already perfect cuffs. "But revenge alone is poor strategy. You possess knowledge valuable to my current enterprises." The arrangement was presented as a business transaction rather than charity. An apartment in Shibuya and a position at Nakamura Tech Security utilizing the business degree Nicholas had paid for. In exchange, I would provide insider information about Carson Industries' operations, particularly in Asian markets. "Your new identity is complete," Akira said, sliding a folder across the desk. "Claire Bennett, American expatriate with degrees from Northwestern. Background checks will confirm your credentials." "And if I refuse?" His expression remained impassive. "Then you are welcome to return to America, where Nicholas Carson's reach extends through every level of influence you once took for granted." The choice was no choice at all. Tokyo's overwhelming sensory landscape became both my refuge and my classroom. The constant crush of humanity in Shibuya Crossing, the bewildering subway system with its color-coded lines, the indecipherable storefronts and food menus, all forced me into a state of perpetual alertness that left little room for dwelling on the past. My apartment was modest by American standards but considered spacious for Tokyo. A one-bedroom on the 12th floor of a modern building, with a balcony overlooking the city's endless expanse. I spent countless nights watching the metropolis pulse with life, so different from Boston's orderly historical charm. In America I'd been sheltered, groomed to be the perfect corporate wife. Here, necessity forced me to navigate crowded trains, learn basic Japanese phrases through late-night study sessions, and live modestly on my entry-level salary. The Carson Black credit cards and limitless resources were relics of another lifetime. Yumiko became my guide and eventually my friend, though her initial manner remained professionally distant. Each morning she appeared at my apartment door precisely at 7:30, escorting me through the labyrinthine subway system to Nakamura headquarters, correcting my fumbling attempts at Japanese along the way. "Your pronunciation is improving," she noted one morning, 3 months into my new life. "But your body language still screams American." "What does that mean?" "You take up too much space. Stand like this." She demonstrated a slightly pigeon-toed stance, shoulders drawn inward. Japanese women make themselves smaller in public. I mimicked her posture, earning a rare nod of approval. "Better. The goal is to blend in, not stand out." Gradually, our relationship warmed as she introduced me to her Tokyo, tiny yakitori restaurants down narrow alleys, a hidden jazz club in Shinjuku where the pianist had once played with Miles Davis, a temple garden in Yanaka where plum blossoms perfumed the February air. Over steaming bowls of tonkatsu ramen one rainy evening, Yumiko finally shared what I'd suspected but never confirmed. "Your stepfather believes you died from complications after your suicide attempt," she informed me, breaking apart her chopsticks with practiced precision. "Akira arranged for medical records to be falsified. There was even a small funeral." I froze mid-bite, noodles suspended between bowl and mouth. "A funeral? Who attended?" "Nicholas and Olivia, of course. Some business associates. A few society friends." She studied my reaction carefully. The Boston Globe ran a small obituary. "Troubled heiress succumbs to injuries after suicide attempt." Quite neat, really. The knowledge should have devastated me, but instead I felt strangely liberated. In death, I'd found freedom from Nicholas's influence. My nightmares, however, told a different story. Recurring dreams where I was drowning in Westlake Park's fountain while Nicholas watched from the shore, unmoved. Earning Akira's trust meant providing detailed information about Carson Industries' operations. Each week I met with his executive team, drawing on years of shadowing Nicholas at corporate events and board meetings. I recalled conversations overheard in his study, names dropped at dinner parties, projects mentioned in passing. Carson Pharmaceuticals initiated trials for CS-114 in rural Indonesia last spring. I explained during one such meeting, sketching organizational charts from memory. The FDA rejected their application after Phase 1 showed liver toxicity in 30% of subjects. Akira's legal team confirmed my information through their own channels. "These trials violate international ethics standards," the head counsel reported. "They're testing drugs rejected by American regulators on unsuspecting patients in rural hospitals, falsifying consent documents." The evidence I helped compile eventually led to a quiet settlement with affected families, though Nicholas's name remained untarnished publicly. Carson Industries sacrificed a mid-level executive as the scapegoat, claiming ignorance of his unauthorized actions. My role in this small victory awakened something I'd suppressed my entire life. A sense of justice that had nothing to do with pleasing authority figures. For the first time I'd acted not as Nicholas's daughter or Akira's asset, but as myself, whatever that now meant. On the anniversary of my death, I found myself drawn to a tiny Buddhist temple in Asakusa. Rain fell in gentle sheets as I stood beneath the shelter of an ancient maple, watching an elderly monk light incense before a stone altar. "You are troubled," he observed in Japanese, startling me with his sudden attention. My Japanese is not good. I apologized in his language, the phrase is still awkward on my tongue. "Your spirit speaks clearly enough," he replied in surprisingly fluent English. "You seek peace for a person who no longer exists." His wisdom penetrated my carefully constructed walls. I was neither Sophia nor fully Claire, living in a limbo between identities, too transformed to reclaim my past, too haunted to fully embrace my future. That night, standing before the bathroom mirror in my apartment, I made a decision. The blonde hair that had survived my transformation, Sophia's last physical remnant, had to go. I cut it short with kitchen scissors, the pale strands falling like snow around my feet. The box of black hair dye purchased weeks earlier finally served its purpose. The symbolism wasn't subtle, but it was necessary. a physical manifestation of my internal transformation. When I sent Akira my updated security badge photo the next morning, his response was immediate. "Now you look like someone who belongs in Tokyo." 2 years into my Tokyo life, during a routine security scan, an alert I'd set up on Carson Industries flagged unexpected news. Nicholas had announced expansion operations to Japan, scheduling a major press conference to launch a partnership with Tanaka Pharmaceuticals, one of Nakamura's chief competitors. The accompanying photo in the business journal showed Nicholas smiling broadly with his arm around Olivia, their poised perfection unchanged by time or conscience. Behind them stood Richard Anderson and his son, the man I was supposed to marry, alongside a young woman wearing my old signature pearl necklace. My replacement, positioned exactly where I once stood in countless similar photos. "They've replaced you completely," Yumiko observed, studying the image over my shoulder in our shared office. "Does that bother you?" Her question forced me to confront the hollow space where hurt should be. 2 years ago the sight would have devastated me. Now I felt only a cold, crystalline clarity. "No," I replied, closing the laptop with decisive finality. "But I think it's time they learned that secrets don't stay buried." That night, from my rain-spattered apartment balcony overlooking Tokyo's glittering expanse, I composed an encrypted email to David Mercer, the investigative journalist whose exposés on pharmaceutical industry corruption had earned him both a Pulitzer and powerful enemies. I offered what no other source could provide: insider knowledge of Nicholas Carson's darkest deeds, from the accident that killed my parents to the current exploitation of Asian medical patients. The final line of my message was simple: "I died so that the truth could live. Are you interested in resurrection?" His reply arrived within minutes. "Tell me everything." David Mercer and I worked methodically over the next year, building a case so airtight that not even Nicholas's army of attorneys could dismantle it. Our communications remained encrypted, our meetings virtual. His investigative team in New York, me in Tokyo, both of us aware that electronic footprints could be traced by those with enough resources and motivation. The flash drive burned a hole in my pocket as I walked through Akira's towering office building on a crisp autumn morning. 3 years of methodical evidence gathering had culminated in this moment. My final meeting with Nakamura before setting our plan in motion. The weight of the tiny device seemed disproportionate to its size, its contents heavier than any physical burden I'd ever carried. Inside was everything: financial records proving Nicholas had embezzled from his own company through shell corporations in the Cayman Islands, documentation of his involvement in my biological parents' accident, including payments to the mechanic who'd tampered with their brakes, testimony from other victims of his ruthless business tactics, carefully gathered through David's network of sources. I'd become something of a corporate spy over the past 3 years, utilizing my position in Akira's security firm to build skills in digital intelligence. What had begun as simple information sharing about Carson Industries' operations had evolved into sophisticated counterintelligence when Nicholas expanded into the Japanese market. Each time he attempted to undermine a Nakamura subsidiary or poach talent, I was there, anticipating his moves through knowledge of his tactical playbook. Akira's office occupied the entire top floor, its glass walls offering a panoramic view of Tokyo's skyline. He stood with his back to the door, hands clasped behind him as he contemplated the city spread below like a living circuit board. "You're certain about this course?" he asked without turning, having sensed my presence. "Once initiated, it cannot be reversed." I placed the flash drive on his immaculate desk. "This contains copies of everything we've gathered. David has the originals, secured in multiple locations." He finally turned, studying me with the penetrating gaze that had unnerved business rivals for decades. "You understand what happens if you do this?" His normally impassive face showed something I'd never seen there before: concern. "Nicholas Carson isn't just your stepfather. He's connected to powerful people who protect their own. The congressman he supported for 20 years now chairs the Financial Oversight Committee. The judge who plays golf with him every Sunday has jurisdiction over corporate cases in Massachusetts." I nodded, the weight of my decision settling firmly on my shoulders. "I died once because of his secrets. I won't die again." For the first time in our complicated relationship, Akira placed a paternal hand on my shoulder. "Then I will ensure you have what you need. My security team will accompany you to America. Remote but present." Back in my apartment, the transformation was already underway. Living room walls disappeared beneath a strategic map of connections, timelines, and vulnerabilities. Red string connecting photographs, documents, and newspaper clippings like a crimson web of corruption. 3 years of investigation had revealed the true extent of Nicholas's empire and its rotten foundation. But he'd built layers of protection around himself through political donations, strategic marriages between associates' children, and meticulously buried evidence. The map illustrated these defenses in concentric circles, each one representing a barrier we would need to breach. David Mercer's face appeared on my secure laptop screen that evening, his expression grave. Despite his reputation for exposing corporate corruption, even he seemed daunted by the scope of Nicholas's influence. Going public isn't enough, he warned, running a hand through his prematurely gray hair. I've seen this before. People like him survive scandals through expensive lawyers and convenient scapegoats. Some mid-level executive takes the fall, pays a fine that amounts to pocket change, and business continues with barely a hiccup. That's why the memorial service is key, I explained, pointing to the invitation I'd obtained through careful manipulation of the funeral home's database. Everything we've gathered becomes exponentially more powerful when delivered at the moment he's performing his greatest lie. David nodded slowly. Theatrical certainly, but also dangerous. You'll be walking into the lion's den with a target on your back. He won't recognize me, I assured him, though the slight tremble in my voice betrayed my own uncertainty. No one will until I choose to reveal myself. He was right about one thing. Public humiliation alone wouldn't satisfy the debt Nicholas owed, not just to me but to my real parents and countless others he'd destroyed. True justice required something more personal, more devastating. Watching his carefully constructed world crumble while looking into the eyes of the daughter he'd discarded. The notification appeared on my phone 2 months later during a late-night coding session. An obituary posted in my hometown newspaper. Memorial service announced for Sophia Carson, beloved daughter of Nicholas and Olivia Carson, on the 3rd anniversary of her passing. My hands trembled as I read the flowery language describing a daughter, taken too soon, and parents, still grieving their tremendous loss. The audacity was breathtaking. Nicholas and Olivia positioning themselves as bereaved parents when they'd orchestrated my destruction. More importantly, this presented the opportunity I'd been waiting for. Every important business associate, every politician in Nicholas's pocket, every family friend who believed his lies would gather in one place to maintain the fiction of Sophia Carson's tragic suicide. The perfect audience for the truth. Creating Claire Bennett had been about survival, but what I needed now was someone unmemorable, someone who could slip through security and blend into a crowd of mourners. I spent weeks crafting this final disguise. Subtle makeup techniques to soften my already altered features, brown contact lenses to replace my distinctive blue-gray eyes, unremarkable clothing expensive enough to belong but not stand out. Hours in front of my bathroom mirror were devoted to practicing expressions I'd never naturally wear. Sympathetic nods, the appropriately solemn downturn of lips at a memorial service, the slightly uncomfortable posture of a distant business associate paying respects rather than a daughter returning from the dead. Yumiko, who'd become my closest confidant over the past 3 years, watched with growing concern as I obsessively refined these details. One evening, as I practiced altering my distinctive gait to something more subdued, she finally voiced what must have been building for months. "What happens after?" she asked, perched on the edge of my couch, surrounded by the evidence web that had consumed my living space. I paused mid-step, confused by the question. "After what?" "After you've exposed him and burned down everything he's built. What then? Who will Claire Bennett become when she no longer needs to destroy Nicholas Carson?" The question caught me off guard, a blind spot in my meticulous planning. For 3 years, vengeance had been my North Star, my purpose, the framework around which I'd built my new existence. I had planned every detail of my revenge but nothing beyond it. "I haven't thought that far ahead," I admitted, the realization unsettling. Yumiko's expression softened with rare vulnerability. "Perhaps you should. Revenge is a powerful fuel, but it burns quickly and leaves nothing behind but ash. You've built something here. Skills, connections, a life. Don't sacrifice your future for his past." Her words haunted me in the weeks that followed as preparations accelerated. Akira's team secured my travel documentation, ensuring Claire Bennett could enter the United States without raising flags in any system Nicholas might monitor. David's associates arranged secure transportation from the airport to a safe house outside Boston. 2 weeks before the memorial, I received an unexpected email that pierced through my tactical focus. It came from Megan, my old friend who'd sheltered me briefly before my escape to Tokyo, who'd believed the story of my suicide because there had been no alternative explanation for my disappearance. She'd sent it to my old account, which I still monitored through an encrypted connection. "I don't know why I'm writing to you. Maybe just to say I never believed what they said about you. Nicholas has been acting strange about this memorial, insisting on a closed casket even though there's nothing to bury. Sometimes I wonder if you're still out there somewhere." Her words solidified my resolve while simultaneously reminding me that Nicholas's deception had claimed more victims than just me. There were people like Megan who deserved the truth as much as Nicholas deserved exposure. I booked a flight to America under my Claire Bennett identity, arranged for David to be ready with his editorial team, and spent one final night looking out over Tokyo's glittering skyline. The city that had once seemed so alien had become home, reshaping me as I learned to navigate its complexities. Standing on my balcony watching raindrops race down the glass barrier, I realized Tokyo hadn't just provided shelter. It had rebuilt me cell by cell into someone capable of justice rather than revenge. The distinction was subtle but critical. In the reflection of the rain-streaked glass, I caught glimpses of both women I'd been. Sophia's determined eyes set in Claire's reconstructed face. As lightning briefly illuminated the sky, I made a silent promise to the hybrid woman who stared back at me. After the funeral, after Nicholas faced the consequences of his actions, Claire Bennett would be free to truly live. The architect of vengeance had designed a perfect plan for destruction. Now it was time to execute it. The 13-hour flight from Tokyo to Boston left me with too much time to doubt my plan. Each minute in that pressurized cabin felt like another opportunity for my resolve to leak away. I'd rehearsed this confrontation countless times in my mind, but now that it was imminent, unexpected emotions surfaced. Not just determination, but a profound grief for the family I'd once believed was mine. Morning broke over Boston with a fitting dramaturgy. Rain poured from leaden skies as my taxi approached the Carson family church. Its Gothic spires stark against storm clouds like accusing fingers pointed heavenward. How appropriate that even the weather seemed to mourn the fictional tragedy Nicholas had created. The driver commented on the nasty day for a memorial, unaware of the true storm about to break inside those hallowed walls. I paid in cash and stepped onto the rain-slick sidewalk, my sensible heels already an unfamiliar sensation after years of Tokyo's fashion. The black umbrella concealed my face as I joined the stream of somber attendees, most wearing expressions of practiced sadness that never quite reached their eyes. These were Nicholas's people. Business associates, political connections, social climbers, all performing the expected role of mourners. Security guards checked invitations at the door, an unusual precaution for a memorial service, but entirely in character for Nicholas's pathological need for control. My pulse quickened as I approached, the forged invitation Akira had arranged feeling suddenly flimsy in my gloved hand. The guard barely glanced at it before nodding me through, more concerned with keeping out journalists than scrutinizing mourners. I slipped into the back row of the ornate sanctuary, heart thundering against my ribs. The church smelled of rain-dampened wool, expensive perfume, and the cloying sweetness of far too many flowers. At the front stood a glossy white casket flanked by enormous arrangements of white lilies. My favorite flowers once upon a time, a detail Nicholas had remembered for this theatrical production. The irony of an empty coffin waiting for a living woman wasn't lost on me. The organist played a somber Bach piece I recognized from countless Sunday services in this very church, where I'd sat dutifully between Nicholas and Olivia, the perfect family in their regular pew. Today that front row was occupied by the architects of my destruction. Nicholas and Olivia held court, accepting condolences with dignified nods that conveyed appropriate grief without the messiness of actual emotion. My stepfather had aged visibly in 3 years, new lines etching his face like cracks in a foundation, his once perfect posture showing the slightest hint of a stoop. Olivia clung to his arm, her knuckles white against his black suit, her face a careful mask of sorrow that didn't quite disguise the fear in her eyes. Strategically positioned throughout the church were Carson Industries executives, local politicians whose campaigns Nicholas had funded, and society figures whose approval he'd always craved. I recognized faces from childhood galas, board meetings, and charity functions, people who had watched me grow up without ever really seeing me. In the second row sat Richard Anderson and his son, my once intended husband, the merger that never happened. Beside them was an elegant young woman wearing my mother's pearl earrings, her hand resting possessively on the younger Anderson's arm. They'd not only erased me but replaced me entirely, the corporate alliance proceeding with a different pawn. As the service began, a minister who'd never met me spoke about a troubled young soul finding peace, while a slideshow displayed carefully curated photographs of Sophia Carson's life. Ballet recitals at age 6. Graduation from Princeton. The Carson family yacht in St. Tropez. A perfect narrative that conveniently ended before I could ruin Nicholas's plans. No mention of adoption, no hint of my biological parents, no acknowledgement of the truth. I watched faces in the congregation as they gazed at these images. Some genuinely sad, others merely performing the expected response, a few checking watches or phones when they thought no one was looking. How many suspected the truth? How many had been complicit in Nicholas's schemes over the years? The moment of reckoning approached as Nicholas himself rose to address the gathering, straightening his tie in that characteristic gesture I'd seen thousands of times. He moved to the pulpit with the confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable, surveying his assembled audience before beginning his performance. "My daughter was everything to me," he began, his voice breaking with well-rehearsed emotion. "Not a day passes that I don't wonder if I could have saved her from herself." Each word sent ice through my veins. The sheer calculation behind his performance, using my suicide to absolve himself of responsibility, ignited something molten within me. This wasn't just a lie. It was a complete inversion of truth, painting himself as the grieving father rather than the architect of my destruction. As he continued spinning his fabrication, describing a troubled daughter's spiral into depression rather than his own murderous schemes, I slowly removed my dark glasses. The wig followed, my tow-black hair falling free around my reconstructed face. My movements were deliberate and calm despite the storm raging inside. A woman to my right noticed first, her sharp intake of breath drawing the attention of others nearby. I stood, no longer concerned with concealment. David's team would be outside by now, photographers and reporters positioned as we'd planned. Nicholas faltered mid-sentence as our eyes met across the church, his practiced eulogy dying on his lips. Recognition dawned slowly in his eyes, confusion giving way to disbelief as I walked steadily toward the center aisle. The soft murmur of confused whispers rose around me like gathering wind before a hurricane. "Miss me?" I asked, my voice carrying in the sudden silence. Gasps rippled through the congregation as I moved toward the casket, each step measured and purposeful on the marble floor. The click of my heels echoed in the stunned quiet. "Quite a turnout for my funeral," I continued, reaching the white coffin and running my fingers along its polished surface. "Shame about the empty coffin." Nicholas's face drained of color, his carefully constructed mask slipping to reveal naked panic. Olivia swayed beside him, clutching the pew for support, her horror suggesting she hadn't known the extent of his deception. "This is impossible," Nicholas managed, his voice stripped of its usual authority. "You died. There were death certificates, medical reports." I smiled, the expression feeling foreign on my reconstructed face. "You taught me well about falsifying documents, didn't you? Just like you did with my parents' accident report." Murmurs swept through the crowd as I reached into my purse, withdrawing the USB drive containing 3 years of meticulously gathered evidence. "Everyone here deserves to know exactly who they're mourning with today," I announced, turning to face the congregation. "Not Sophia Carson, troubled suicide victim, but the daughter of James and Elizabeth Reed, murdered by Nicholas Carson to prevent them from exposing his first financial fraud." The sanctuary erupted in shocked exclamations. Several executives from Carson Industries immediately rose, moving toward exits only to find them blocked by members of David's team, who had slipped in during the commotion. "This is absurd," Nicholas shouted, struggling to regain control of the situation. "This woman is clearly disturbed." "Dini doesn't lie, Nicholas," I cut in. Tests confirming my identity as Elizabeth Reed's daughter are included in the evidence package already being distributed to federal investigators and select journalists. Chaos erupted as security guards moved toward me, only to be blocked by David and his team entering through the side doors, cameras recording every moment. The flash of photography punctuated the growing disorder like lightning in a gathering storm. "Nicholas Carson," David announced, his clear voice cutting through the tumult. "We have questions regarding your involvement in the deaths of James and Elizabeth Reed in 2001, financial improprieties at Carson Industries, and the attempted murder of their daughter, who is very much alive." The congregation dissolved into shocked conversations and hurried exits as Nicholas lunged toward me, his composed facade completely shattered. His face contorted with a rage I'd glimpsed only once before, the night he'd struck me at the dinner table. "You ungrateful little," he hissed, hands outstretched as if to finish what Vincent had started years ago. Before he could reach me, Richard Anderson, surprisingly, stepped between us, his substantial frame blocking Nicholas's advance. "That's enough, Nick," he said firmly, his voice carrying the authority of decades in corporate boardrooms. He turned to stare at my face, his eyes widening with shock and dawning recognition. "My God, it really is you, Elizabeth's daughter," he whispered. Those eyes, exactly like James's. In that moment of recognition from my mother's old friend, everything clicked into place. Richard hadn't known about Nicholas's darker deeds. The confusion and horror in his expression told me Nicholas had manipulated him just as he had manipulated everyone else. "Your parents were my closest friends," Richard continued, voice thick with emotion. "Nicholas told me they designated him as your guardian, that their will was forged," I finished for him. "Just like the accident report, just like my death certificate." Outside, police sirens wailed, drawing closer to the church as years of buried secrets finally rose to the surface. Nicholas's expression shifted from rage to calculation, his mind already working on escape routes, explanations, ways to twist this new reality to his advantage. "You won't survive this," he said quietly for my ears alone. "You have no idea what forces you're dealing with." I stepped closer, close enough to see the pulse jumping in his throat, to smell the familiar sandalwood cologne that had once represented safety but now only triggered memories of betrayal. "Neither do you," I replied, my voice steady. "The difference is I've already died once. I have nothing left to lose." The church doors burst open as police officers entered, their purposeful strides echoing through the now chaotic sanctuary. In their lead was Detective Marcus Rivera, whom David had carefully selected for his incorruptible reputation and whose financial crimes unit had been building their own case against Carson Industries for months. "Nicholas Carson," Rivera announced, "we have a warrant for your arrest on charges of securities fraud, conspiracy, and suspicion of murder." As the officers approached, Nicholas's eyes never left mine, his expression transforming from shock to something I'd never seen there before: fear. "You're dead to us," he had told me 3 years ago. Now, as handcuffs closed around his wrists, I saw the truth dawn in his eyes. It wasn't Sophia Carson who had died that day in his study. It was Nicholas Carson who was dead now, his empire of lies crumbling around him in the very church where he'd staged my funeral. The handcuffs closed around Nicholas's wrists with a finality that should have brought me satisfaction. Instead, watching him being led from the church between 2 officers, I felt oddly hollow. 3 years of focused rage had crystallized into this moment, yet victory tasted nothing like I'd imagined. Chaos swirled around me, reporters shouting questions, mourners fleeing the scandal, David's team documenting everything. I stood motionless at the center of the storm, still processing the reality that my carefully orchestrated plan had actually succeeded. "You need to get somewhere safe," David murmured, appearing at my elbow. "This is just the beginning. The media frenzy will be relentless." Megan materialized through the crowd, her practical nature asserting itself amid the chaos. "My guest room is ready," she said simply, linking her arm through mine. "Let's go." The federal investigation moved with surprising speed once the evidence was public. Nicholas faced charges ranging from financial fraud to conspiracy in my parents' deaths, while Olivia negotiated immunity in exchange for testimony about years of covering up his crimes. I watched their carefully constructed world implode from the safety of Megan's modest apartment, the same refuge I'd sought before fleeing to Tokyo. News vans camped outside the Carson estate captured footage of agents removing boxes of documents while Nicholas's former business associates scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. Overnight, invitations to Carson galas became toxic, political donations were returned, and board members resigned citing personal reasons. The house of cards Nicholas had built through decades of manipulation collapsed with breathtaking speed. 3 days after the memorial service, Richard Anderson requested a meeting. We met in a private room at his attorney's office, neutral territory for a conversation heavy with history. I've been trying to reconcile the Nicholas I thought I knew with the man revealed in those documents. He began, looking older than his 60 years. We were partners for 30 years. I trusted him with everything, including my son's future. His hands trembled slightly as he placed a leather-bound photo album on the table between us. I thought you might want these. Your parents, your real parents at happier times. Inside were photographs I'd never seen. My mother laughing on a sailboat, her hair wild in the wind. My father presenting research at a conference, pride evident in his posture. The three of us at what must have been my christening, my parents beaming at the tiny bundle in their arms. A life I couldn't remember, but that should have been mine. They were brilliant, both of them, Richard said, his voice thick with memory. James was developing a breakthrough cardiac medication when they died. Elizabeth had this uncanny ability to see through financial smokescreens. They would have changed the world. He looked up, his eyes flickering over my altered features. Your mother would be proud of your courage. You have her spirit, something Nicholas could never erase no matter how hard he tried. The album became my most precious possession, a tangible link to the truth I'd been denied. Reclaiming my legal identity proved complex after years of existing as Claire Bennett. The attorney who helped me navigate this limbo, a specialist in identity law recommended by David, looked perpetually baffled by the unprecedented nature of my situation. Legally speaking, you died 3 years ago, she explained during our first consultation, surrounded by towers of documents. We're essentially resurrecting you. The process involved DNA tests confirming my relation to my biological parents, untangling Nicholas's deliberate legal knots, and court appearances where I testified about the circumstances leading to my death. Bank accounts had to be unfrozen, death certificates invalidated, insurance payments reclaimed. Each bureaucratic hurdle required explaining my extraordinary circumstances to increasingly wide-eyed government officials. Eventually, the complexity of my case reached the desk of Judge Elena Ramirez, who took personal interest in resolving the tangled legal web. When she finally signed the order restoring my identity after months of proceedings, she offered rare words of compassion from the bench. Ms. Reed Carson, the court recognizes the extraordinary measures you were forced to take for your own survival. Your legal identity is restored, but I recognize that identity itself is more than documents and names. That part of your journey continues beyond these walls. The hyphenated surname had been my choice. Reed to honor my biological parents, Carson because despite everything those years had shaped me too. Erasing them completely felt like another kind of death. As spring turned to summer, I found myself increasingly restless in Boston. The media attention around the Carson scandal gradually subsided as newer outrages took its place. Nicholas awaited trial from a federal detention center, denied bail due to flight risk. Olivia had retreated to a sister's home in Connecticut, leaving the Carson estate to languish under the weight of impending asset forfeiture. I'd accomplished what I'd returned for, yet something was missing. Tokyo pulled at me like a distant tide. I'd built something real there, skills, friendships, purpose, that had nothing to do with Nicholas or my past. You don't have to stay, Megan observed one evening, finding me staring at the Tokyo weather forecast on my laptop. Your testimony is recorded. The prosecutors have everything they need. Her perception startled me. It feels wrong somehow to just leave. Wrong for whom? You've done what you came to do. The rest is just watching punishment unfold. She settled beside me on the couch. That's not reclamation, Sophia. That's still giving Nicholas power over your choices. Her words resonated with uncomfortable truth. I defined myself in opposition to Nicholas for so long that moving beyond revenge required conscious effort. After settling my affairs in America, including establishing a foundation for corporate whistleblowers using funds from the settlement with Carson Industries, I booked a one-way ticket to Tokyo. The night before my departure, I visited the cemetery where my biological parents were buried, placing white lilies on their long-neglected graves. I found the truth, I whispered to the marble headstones. I hope that brings you peace. The familiar neon glow of Shibuya welcomed me home as rain washed the streets clean, the humidity wrapping around me like an embrace after Boston's drier climate. Yumiko met me at the airport, her usual reserve breaking into a genuine smile when she spotted me among the arriving passengers. So who arrives today, Sophia or Claire? She asked as we claimed my luggage, her question cutting to the heart of my ongoing identity reconciliation. I considered the question seriously, feeling the weight of both identities and the freedom of choosing between them. The woman who had boarded the plane in Boston was legally Sophia Reed Carson, but 3 years as Claire Bennett had left indelible marks on my personality, outlook, and capabilities. Just me, I finally answered, still figuring out exactly who that is. Her laughter was warm with understanding. Very zen. You're becoming Japanese after all. Returning to the Nakamura offices felt like closing a circle. Akira received me in his minimalist office, MT Fuji visible through floor-to-ceiling windows behind him. Your actions in Boston have created significant opportunities, he said without preamble. Carson Industries' collapse has left market vacuums in several sectors. I'd expected this conversation. The transactional assessment of how my revenge had benefited his business interests. What I hadn't expected was his next statement. However, I find myself more interested in your future than in Nicholas Carson's past. Akira offered me a partnership rather than my old position, recognizing that my experience made me uniquely qualified to help other victims of corporate corruption. Your perspective crosses cultures and understands both sides of power, he explained, gesturing toward Tokyo's sprawling skyline. That is rare and valuable. My first client was a young executive whistleblower facing retaliation from a pharmaceutical company, circumstances eerily similar to what my biological parents had experienced. Meeting her in a secure location outside Tokyo, I recognized the fear in her eyes, the same terror I'd felt when realizing the extent of Nicholas's betrayal. Guiding her through protection protocols and evidence preservation, I found purpose in translating my trauma into practical wisdom. They think they've already won because they have more resources and influence, I told her as we developed her strategy. That's their vulnerability, underestimating what someone with truth on their side can accomplish. My dual identity became my greatest asset. Sophia Reed Carson understood American corporate culture and legal systems. Claire Bennett knew how to disappear, rebuild, and navigate Asian business protocols. Together, they formed a uniquely qualified advisor for those fighting powerful adversaries. On the anniversary of the memorial service confrontation, I stood on my apartment balcony watching lightning illuminate Tokyo's rainy season skies. An email had arrived earlier from Megan with updates on Nicholas's case. Guilty pleas on most charges, sentencing scheduled for next month, and pictures of the for sale sign outside the Carson estate. The dynasty built on secrets and corruption was ending not with dramatic destruction but with quiet dismantling, piece by piece. I should have felt triumphant, but instead found myself contemplating the cost of the past 3 years. The person I might have been without Nicholas's betrayal, the experiences lost and gained through becoming someone else. As thunder rolled across the city, I made peace with the complicated truth. Nicholas had tried to kill me, but in forcing me to rebuild myself completely, he had inadvertently given me something genuine. A life truly my own, forged through fire and entirely on my terms. I lifted my teacup in a silent toast to the storm, to Tokyo, to the woman I'd become. Neither Sophia Carson nor Claire Bennett, but something stronger created from both. Raindrops raced down the glass barrier of my balcony, Tokyo's lights refracting through each droplet into miniature galaxies of possibility. The past was settled. The future finally was mine alone to define.